Aloha, this is Kevin Fung with Blue Planet Surf. We're going to show you guys how to cut and size the new 2016 Kai Zen Blue Planet Paddle. When you're figuring out what is the right height for the paddle, there's two ways to go about picking that. The first way is, if you don't know the exact inch measurement you got to cut to, if you set the paddle right in front of you and just comfortably lift your arm up, if the handle were right about here, that would give me a good rule of thumb measurement for the right height for this paddle. So the way to size for that is, I just take off the middle section of the paddle and just kind of line it up with the blade section so that it lines up properly. And then from there I'm going to take a piece of blue tape and just mark it off so that it's in line with the bottom section. And then we're going to cut in the middle of that to prevent any splintering. That's why you got the tape there. The other way to cut the Kai Zen paddle, if you know the exact inch measurement of your paddle, what you can do is you can take a tape measure and then just measure the full distance of the paddle from the tip of the blade to the tip of the handle. So this paddle right here is about 91 inches long, so if I need to get it to a certain inch measurement, I just got to figure out how many inches I got to take off, and then from there you're just going to cut that amount of inches off this section of the shaft. When you are cutting between the middle section of the shaft, there are nubs along it. You got to cut in the middle of the nubs. If you cut on one of the nubs, you leave kind of an open section on the paddle where it could take on water and compromise the performance. One note to mention is that between surfers and racers or recreational paddlers, there is a difference in terms of what is the recommended height for the paddle. For racers and recreational paddlers, on average, the paddle height is going to be about 10 to 15% higher than their height, which comes out to around 8 to 11 inches. Whereas for surfers, it's going to be about 5 to 10% above your height, which usually comes out to around 5 to 7 inches. Now that we got our measurements set on the Kai Zen paddle, we're going to go to the back of the shop, cut this guy, and then we'll show you guys how to hot glue or epoxy if needed. Now that we've got the paddle sized and cut, the third thing for us to do and last thing is to attach the paddle or assemble it. In the stand-up world, there's usually three types of assemblies that you'll find on the market. You have epoxy, which is the most long-term and permanent way to kind of fix a handle to a shaft, or a shaft to a blade, or just to put a paddle together. You have hot glue. A lot of guys in the race world, they like to use hot glue because it's easy to change out components. If you want to train with a big blade and then race with a smaller blade, it's easy to switch everything around. The last type, which you'll probably rarely ever see in the market, is just by using electric tape to assemble the components. Good thing about electric tape, kind of like hot glue, you can change everything around. Downside, it's not a very permanent way or a very efficient way to kind of fix everything together. So what we're going to show for you guys right now is hot gluing a paddle together. When you guys are ready to assemble the paddle, one of the most important things is properly prepping all the surfaces so that the adhesion is going to be as strong as possible and prevent the paddle from kind of loosening up over time. What we like to use at Blue Planet Surf is just 100 grit sandpaper, and then one of these guys, I don't even know what this is called. But on the outside of this male part that's going to go into the female part of the paddle, we're just going to use sandpaper, kind of rough that up. By increasing the surface area, it gives it more place or more space or more surface to bind to. Just makes the connection a lot stronger. And then on the same female side of that part, we're going to use this guy and rough up the inside of the paddle for the exact same purpose. All you want to do, you want to increase surface area, create more places for the epoxy or the hot glue or whatever you're using to bind. And after you finish sanding, kind of roughing up the surface, last very important step is to clean off that surface. If you leave any of these small particles or debris on the paddle, it's going to loosen that joint and make it susceptible to separating or coming apart. One thing we like to do at Blue Planet is use painter's tape, and you just kind of tape off the area that you're working with. That way it prevents any excess hot glue or any excess epoxy kind of dripping or moving over places you don't want. For us, that's just going to help us kind of keep the hot glue confined to this area, make it a little easier for cleanup. But what we like to do when we're hot gluing is, if you just take the male component, this guy, we had it warmed up for a little while, so it should be ready to go. But you're just going to take the hot glue and you're just running this up and down along the surface of this male component. It will slowly cool down as you're putting this on, but what you can do, you can see it over there on the table, we have a heat gun, so once I have it fully lathered up with hot glue. Then I'm just going to take the heat gun, make sure that my glue is nice and warm, so that when I do insert this male component into the female component, the hot glue is not too viscous, and it's gonna move around and be malleable and bind where we need it to bind. So like I said, once I got the hot glue on, then I'm just going to take a heat gun and use this guy to just make sure that the hot glue stays nice and wet, so it's malleable, easy for us to work with. A good indication that the hot glue is to the right temperature for you to slide it in is it's going to start bubbling up or kind of turn white almost. So I'm just going to heat this up until I start to notice that bubbling or the turning white. So now that guy is nice and warm, thanks to the oval shape of our new paddle, it's pretty easy to assemble this guy. You're just going to take this, you just slide it down over that hot glue, push it all the way to the bottom, and then this is where that painter's tape is going to come into play. If you just take a finger, kind of just wipe your finger along the outside, it's going to get off the majority of hot glue, and then you can take the painter's tape, do the exact same thing. You just peel that away while it's still relatively warm and easy to work with, and now we have minimal cleanup to worry about. Close up, that's kind of like what it'll look like once you have it all assembled. The last thing to do after you've assembled everything and added the shrink wrap for kind of a seamless finish between the joints is to make sure that the blade and the handle of the paddle are lined up properly. If any of them are off-centered or not lined up properly, it's going to throw off the paddling technique. For our Kai Zen model, because it has that oval shape to it, it's pretty easy to make sure everything's lined up. Pretty much you just shove it into the other component and it'll line up perfectly just from matching up with shape.